Welcome to the Speak with People podcast. My name is Jason Raitz. I'll be your host, and this podcast exists to help you improve your communication skills. Whether you communicate one-on-one, to a team, from a stage, or from behind a screen, we know that when we improve our communication skills as leaders, it exponentially changes everything. It improves our relationships, it improves our leadership skills, and it improves our business skills. So let's get ready to dive into this next episode. Well, how do you build an absolutely incredible culture within your company? As you're doing that, how do you find new talent? How do you then develop those leaders who have been with you for many seasons? And how do you keep giving them opportunities to grow in their leadership? This is such an amazing series of questions, and ones that many business leaders are focusing on a lot because they're trying to figure out, especially as the younger generations come up with Generation Alpha and Generation Z, how do we create cultures that are healthy, that are challenging, and give all the different generations their opportunities to grow and develop as leaders. I am blown away today because we have just an absolutely amazing guest on the Speak with People podcast. She is a phenomenal and brilliant leader who I have followed for quite some time, partly because she works for one of my absolute favorite companies on the planet, she worked for, and now she's doing so much more to help other companies, and so I'll let her tell you more about that. But I can't wait to introduce you to Dee Ann Turner. Thank you so much for being on the Speak with People podcast.
It's completely my pleasure, Jason. I've been looking forward to it.
I love it. Well, I'm sure most of my listeners have heard about my love for Chick-fil-A, but why don't we, take them into your story a little bit, walk us through who you are, what you do, how you got to where you are right now.
Well, it was quite the journey. I started out 8 years old. I wanted to be a writer.
Oh,
and
wow.
and that stayed with me all through high school into college. I was a journalism major. When I left school in the early 80s, there was a recession going on, and it was hard for unexperienced journalists to find a job. And so I decided to go in the field of advertising, and I was in advertising, and I wasn't really happy with the organization I was in because we had a toxic culture, among other things. And so I started looking for something different. And I grew up in the Atlanta area, so I knew all about Chick-fil-A. I knew it had great products, but I didn't know anything about its home office, as it was called then, now called the support center. And so I applied for a job there under the recommendation, actually, of my husband. And I was quickly turned down. And so 2 weeks later, I applied again, and I was turned down again. And then I was really curious, who is this company? I mean, after all of 21 years old, I know everything, and you don't want to
Yes.
hire me. What's the problem? So I started really pursuing them. And finally, about 6 months later, I was offered a position, but not in advertising, in human resources.
Wow.
They saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And that was the ability to recruit and select talent for their organization. So what a great pick by that guy then, who was the vice president of human resources, that saw that in me. And I really thought within 2 years I would be back into the marketing area, and I envisioned myself writing and using those talents. I did use them in the HR world. One of the very first things I got to do was write a recruiting brochure. And so I used those talents over time. I stayed with Chick-fil-A for 33 years, and 30 of those years I was leading in the area of talent. Everything from selecting Chick-fil-A franchisees, literally selected thousands of them, selected thousands of people who work at the support center or have worked at the support center. I led culture and engagement, staff training and development, diversity and inclusion, even the child care center and the wellness program. All of it came under my leadership as VP of Talent there. And then I launched and led for 3 years Chick-fil-A sustainability function. And then I had the opportunity, as did about 100 other of my cohorts, to take a voluntary early retirement option. And it was offered, and I had written my first book, It's My Pleasure, and released it in 2015. And I had a contract with Baker Publishing to write 2 more books. And I was trying to figure out, how in the world am I going to do this and promote them and so forth. Chick-fil-A was generous with me, especially its chairman at the time, Dan Cathy, allowing me to represent the organization on different platforms and speak about it. But I knew that that would not be an ongoing responsibility. And
Right.
so when the early retirement came up, I thought, this is it. This is my chance to do the thing I wanted to do since I was 8 years old. And so
Wow.
I felt like I was jumping off a bridge into the great abyss of the unknown. And I always say my best career decision ever was going to Chick-fil-A, and my second best decision was actually knowing when to leave,
Oh,
because
yeah.
there was another path for me. And I'm so glad I took that because I've enjoyed that wonderful message and all the leadership teachings that I learned at Chick-fil-A. I've enjoyed sharing those literally with the world, all over the world, from New
Wow.
Zealand to China to Canada to South America. It's just been an amazing almost 6 years. I'm right about 6 years of doing this, and released two more books in that. Wrote and released two more books, Bet on Talent and Crush Your Career. And I've just had an opportunity to share wonderful messages with organizations, nonprofits, educational institutions all over the world. And then lastly, some of my favorite things that I do. One of them is I'm executive in residence at High Point University,
Hmm.
and I just love that role. I specifically work in the area of talent acquisition. And so I help prepare students for their future careers
Oh,
and give them coaching around that, and uh, enjoy also engaging with the staff as well. That's just one of my very special opportunities working with those young people. So it's just been a great ride. And thanks for asking about my story.
absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. I love that. So much to unpack there. And if we had like 2 or 3 hours, I would definitely dive into all different levels. But one of the things that really stuck out is just the fortitude that you had. And I love that you work with young adults now. I would love to ask you, do you think this generation of young adults have that same fortitude as previous generations? Has it not changed? Is it less? Because your story is not very normal, you know? I mean,
Mhm.
most young adults I know now would say, "Well, they turned me down." Okay. And you just kept going, and I love that story. I would love your thoughts on
Well, not only do I work with those young people, I raised three of them.
that.
And so I have three
Yes.
sons, two of the millennial generation. The youngest is Gen Z, and they're very different than anything I hear stereotypical.
Mm,
I find the students at High Point, by the way, to be the same way. But I watch a lot just in my own sons and how they approach things, and their work ethic is very strong. Our youngest is 2 years out of college, and he routinely calls me on the way home from the office at 8 o'clock at night. He's still going to an office and he's still working, 10, 12 hours a day as a banker. So I see that they do have this. Here's the difference. And I actually love this, particularly about Gen Z. I love this about them.
yeah.
They'll work hard for you. They
Right.
get a bad rap and people say they're lazy. They'll work hard for you. Here's the difference between them and I was at the tail end of the boomers. We worked hard for the sake of working hard.
Mm,
They work hard for a purpose.
right.
So if you want them to work hard for you, then give them a meaningful purpose of what your organization is about. They want to have impact. And if they
Wow.
believe that what they're doing has some kind of significant impact other than just making other people wealthy, then they'll work hard for you. And that's the real secret. Here's the other thing about millennials and Gen Z that I like to tell people. Again, going back to this stereotype, sometimes, I mean, I've heard words and I don't even like to say it because
Hmm.
I don't, but lazy or something like that. Here's the deal. They have tools we didn't have. If
Right.
they worked as long and as hard as we did, something's wrong because they have tools that help them work far faster and get things done faster so that they can enjoy more of the other parts of their life. So I really think it's about those two issues. Are you giving them a meaningful purpose to pursue to make them want to give their all and be all in, as some like to say? And secondly, um, recognizing that it shouldn't take them as long as it took us to do things because they simply have so many advanced tools. And of course, that technology literally changes every day.
Right. I love that. Yeah, it's my almost 20-year-old son works with me with Speak with People and does all of our graphics and design and video.
Mm.
And it's amazing. I'll be 50 next year. How fast, like he'll just figure something out. And I'm like, well, that took me 8 hours.
Yeah. I need him, by the way. Is he for hire?
Absolutely. He does great. He does great stuff. One of the things actually he's been doing recently is I go do speaking things. He'll then follow with a camera and then put together a little reel about it. And
Oh, yeah.
it's been great. LinkedIn has loved that.
I bet they have. Well, we'll talk after.
Sounds good. Sounds good. I love it. Okay. So, I got to say one more thing about your story. I love that your son calls you. Early on, I can remember before my grandmother passed, she said, Jason, one of the best things you could do for your parents is still call them when you're adult and you're an adult. And I was just like, okay, grandma, whatever. And now, my oldest is 24 down to 10. I mean, what a great example, to be able to just have that communication with your boys. I mean, just that's fantastic.
Well, we're recording this on Mother's Day week, and that's probably, I mean, I have to throw this out there because they'll probably listen to this podcast someday at some point. But, it really is actually two of them have called me already today, and one has texted.
Oh,
And that happens almost every day, which is absolutely amazing for 24, 30, and 34.
yep. I love that. I love it. So 33 years with Chick-fil-A. When you started, did you recognize early on that this was a healthy culture, that this was something special, or because you were brand new, kind of jumping in, you were just kind of in that, or when did the awakening happen that you went, wow, this is something really special.
Well, this is one of the great things that Chick-fil-A did, at least as long as I was there, and I assume they still do, but their ability to actually convey that culture before you come to work there. See, I think
Mm,
that's a really important part of the selection process for any organization is that your candidate has enough time to learn about your organization to know they'll be a fit there. Not just for you to decide, but for them to really engage in your culture and know that it's the right culture. I mentioned I was coming from a place of a toxic culture. It was a very rules based culture. Everything about it had a rule. And what I learned at Chick-fil-A is they were very principles based. They
mm,
didn't have they didn't even have an employee handbook, honestly, for most of the time I worked there. That came much later
yeah.
because they weren't a place of rules. Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A, he believed that if you taught principles and you selected talent who could thrive in an environment that didn't need rules to operate, that you would please the customer much better. So you think about why Chick-fil-A has such great customer service is not because they have a lot of rules around it. It's because they taught the principles of, hey,
Wow.
team member, will you make second mile second nature?
Wow.
Will you just strive in every instance when you engage with a customer to go above and beyond? And then they don't dictate what above and beyond looks like. They let that they select the kind of talent that can figure out what that looks
Wow.
like. And so,
Yeah.
just get quickly example. I know I went down a little tangent with
I
you,
love
but
it. No,
I think
please
this
do
is
it.
an important part of who Chick-fil-A is and why I was so attracted to that culture. But this whole idea of a principles-based organization where you don't feel confined by rules. And so, this started with us getting when we first rolled this out a couple decades ago. We started getting letters and emails and phone calls about team members doing things like changing tires in the parking lot or jumping off dead batteries in the drive-through, and those little extra acts. Well, those things turned into really big things. I mean, the next thing you know, we're hearing about all over the news about an employee a team member that sends a boat to pick up some people in a flood in Katrina, and their house is being flooded, and they call the Chick-fil-A for help, or the employee in the drive-through, the team member in the drive-through that sees a child in the backseat of the car choking and jumps through the drive-through window and saves the
Wow.
child. And then the most recent that I heard, and now it's been a little while, but in the busiest drive-through in the whole chain, a team member sees a woman and her baby being carjacked. He runs out of the restaurant, gets gets the carjacker to the ground, and holds him there till the police comes.
Oh my
I mean, that's
goodness.
second mile service. That's more than a chicken sandwich. So that
Wow.
is just one example that I could give you. We could talk for days about it,
Sure.
literally days about what they've done with culture at Chick-fil-A. But what they make sure that you know that before you even come to work there so that you have a good sense of that. And the best organizations do that. They give candidates a chance to really understand the culture before they ever have orientation.
Wow. Just amazing. Yeah, boy, it's probably going on 12 years, 10 years maybe. I was at a leadership a global leadership summit in Chicago, and I was walking out of one of the main sessions, and I was in a stairwell, and I turned around and I bumped into a gentleman, and I recognized him because I have followed Chick-fil-A for many years, and it was Dan Cathy. And I went into pure, fan mode, and I didn't mean to. My son was with me. He's like, don't embarrass yourself. But I'm like, I have to tell Mr. Cathy like how much his leadership has meant to me. And I was just shocked. Like Dan took, I mean, you would have thought that I was, that he knew me because he was so engaged. He was caring. He, whips out a free chicken card, signs it. I never used it. I actually have it I have a picture of Dan and I together with the card next to it on my office wall.
That's awesome.
But then as I turned away, I watched him walk away, and I looked back, and he starts picking up the trash that's on the ground, and I'm like, this is not even his building. Like this is not his event. It was all a mind blowing experience.
Well, that's a perfect Chick-fil-A story because that is real. That's the real Dan. And that's a lot of leaders and people who are at Chick-fil-A. It's funny, it gets ingrained in you because we always did that. I mean, we picked up trash. We, went to a restaurant. If there was trash, it was just our natural instinct to pick it
Yep.
up. Well, several years after I retired, my husband and I were at one of the Chick-fil-A restaurants at lunchtime, and it was on a busy vacation route and at a busy time, and the place was just packed. The drive-through was packed, the restaurant was packed, and the trash was just overflowing. And I just felt for these employees because I realized they were trying to serve guests and they couldn't get to it, and the trash was blowing across everything. And so I got up and I had to go
Yep.
pick it up, and I picked it all up, and then I went inside and said, "Hey, if you got a trash bag, I'll take care of this." And they're like, "Who are you?" And I said, "You just don't understand. I have to do this." And I got back to the table. My husband was like, "It just never goes away, does it?" I said, "I couldn't help it. I just couldn't even eat for the stress it was causing me."
Yes.
And what I really felt, I felt for those team members because I knew they were doing the absolute best they could do. And so anyway, it's just part of the culture and who we are.
I love it. I love it. Well, off recording, you and I were talking just a little bit about our own kids, and I was telling you how I had a 24-year-old who's looking different career routes and all that kind of stuff. As you work with that age group, what do you suggest to them as they're looking at potential jobs and companies? For those kind of foundational healthy markers, for the cultures that they're going into, are there some things to look out for? Or maybe, to the leader who's listening, who's looking at, transitioning, starting a new job with a company, what do they look for, as much as they can to see if it is a healthy culture?
Sure. Well, this might get a little repetitive in our conversation because I know we're going to talk a lot about culture.
Hmm.
But for me, the foundation of a remarkable culture is really three things. I already talked about one: a meaningful purpose.
Yep.
Why does the organization exist? Do they know why they exist? And do they live it out? I'll talk more about that in a second. Point number two that you're looking for is, do they have a challenging mission?
Yep.
Really talented people are looking for big goals to pursue. So what is their mission? What are they trying to accomplish? And then thirdly, what are their core values and how are they demonstrated in the organization? So purpose answers the why question. Why are we
Yep.
here? Mission answers, what are we here to do? And core values answer, and how are we going to do it? And so if I'm a person looking for a job, then I'm going to look at that organization and I'm going to look for those things. Now, hopefully that's something I can go find on their website. And I'm
Right.
not going to go to an interview and ask them what those things are because hopefully it's out there somewhere or it's in an article.
Yep.
But maybe it's a startup. So maybe those things aren't out there yet. And you want to talk to the CEO about what his or her vision is for that organization through those three words. But the one thing I want to do is I want to go into an interview and I want to ask the people, when they give me a chance to ask questions,
Yep.
I want to ask the people who would be my peers. Now, how do you see the leaders in this organization living out the purpose?
Wow.
When do you think this mission will be accomplished? Because in organizations with big missions, when they accomplish them, they set a new mission. Have you ever been here when the goal was accomplished and a new mission was set? How is that done? These core values, how do you see those lived out? What what do people in the organization do that demonstrate that these are known throughout the organization and they live them out? Tell me a
Wow.
story about that. Um, so that's what I'm doing. If I really want to understand the culture of an organization, I'm going to ask for the examples. Now, there's some great technology out there too. And I haven't decided if any of these are more reliable than the other, because sometimes the information is not reliable, but you do
Hmm.
have the Indeeds and the Glassdoor and those types of research. And I know that all of the young people are doing that because I hear that from my own kids as they've started their careers. But you have that information as a starting point. But everything you read, I mean, it's just another form of social media in a way. So don't
Yep.
believe everything you read in social media. Try to get to the source,
Yep.
talk to people in person or on the telephone, and ask those questions.
I love that. I love that. We talk a lot about L&D on this podcast, learning and development, because we have a lot of either small business owners or folks that work for mid-sized companies. And it's interesting. I was just asking an executive coach yesterday what they see. If it's just the large companies that invest in the learning and development, do small companies do it? And so I'd love to ask you the same question, especially as you consult and speak with companies of all sizes. Is it just something that, a larger company with a bigger budget can do? Do you see it across the board?
Yeah. I see both. I see
Yeah,
uh, organizations that invest in people at any size, and I see big companies that don't invest like they should, and small companies that are over the top. My personal experience, I'll start with Chick-fil-A as personal experience because they do some and again, when I say they do, it's up until the time I retire because I no
sure.
longer am there, and I don't know what they do today, but I assume that things have stayed very similar. But one of the things they did at their staff level is they have a development budget for every single employee. It doesn't
Wow.
matter if you're the most
Wow.
senior VP, if you're an executive VP, or you are part of the grounds maintenance team, everybody has a development budget and they're expected to use it. And sometimes it's a professional development and something is personal that they need to do. And and they work with their supervisor to agree on what would be the best use. They make recommendations, their supervisor approves it. But everyone experiences development
Wow.
because it's looked at as a long-term relationship,
Right.
not just you're going to be here for a few months and you're going to be gone. Oh, this is important, talking about development in young people. So there are three things that Gen Z particularly are looking for. If that's what you're doing, which a lot of companies, that's what they're doing, is selecting that emerging talent. There are three things they're looking for. Number one is a remarkable culture. Number two is an opportunity for leaders to invest in them. And three, they're looking for to be some part of something bigger than themselves, which to me kind of goes back to that purpose thing that I was talking
Yep.
about.
Yep.
So this learning and development piece is huge. So if you're not doing, and something is better than nothing, by the way, don't have
Right.
a ton of money to spend on this. You've already invested a lot to select this talent. It costs you a whole lot more if they leave you because they're not being developed.
Mm.
So it's worth the investment in them. So do something, and not everything costs money. You know, um, have a resource of here's some podcasts, just like the
Yep.
Speak with People podcast. Like, and
Yep.
what are some podcasts you could listen to? Here's a library of books, and you get the best business books out there. I'll be recommending some to you later, and put those in your library, and those are available to everybody. So not everything costs money. Have an internal mentoring program where
Yep.
emerging leaders can learn from more seasoned leaders. And by the way, seasoned leaders can learn from the emerging leaders as well. So I think that's really important. Now, let me speak to those that might be listening and say, my company's not investing in me.
Yeah.
Well, then invest in yourself.
Oof.
It's worth a few dollars, to read the books. And like I said, listen to the podcast, attend the conference, upskill yourself with online courses in your off hours. There's all kind. Find yourself a mentor if there's not one assigned to you. By the way, usually the mentors you find are better than the ones assigned to you
Hmm.
because you've created a relationship with those people that
Yep.
wasn't mandated but was optional. So do all the things that help you develop because you're either growing or you're dying. And
Wow.
so if your organization is not investing in you, make sure that you're investing in yourself for the role that you have, the future role you're going to have, and maybe at another organization.
Wow. Wow. That is just absolute gold. And so thank you for that. Is there something as you look back in your season, especially, leading the charge with looking for talent and developing them? Is there anything from that, um, uh, what your area did that you're surprised more companies don't replicate, or maybe on top of that, something that you actually learned from another company that you went, wow, we've got to really, put this in place here.
In selecting talent, one of the things that I was surprised, and this is very tactical answer to what you said, but one of the things I was surprised is how few companies really reference their candidates.
Wow.
They don't get references, or they get the kind of references where you call a past employer and you say, "Would you rehire them?" Which most of the time they're going to say yes, whether
Right.
they would or not. They'll tell you
Right.
yes. And so one of the game changers in why Chick-fil-A has such great talent is they invest a lot in that part of the process.
Mm.
They invest a lot in interviewing their candidates and spending a lot of time with them. And then they invest a lot. Those reference interviews are likely about 45 minutes to an hour long. Can you imagine?
Wow.
And they ask the same type of questions to the reference as they ask to the candidate. And they ask for the examples of, they may just throw one out. The core values of our organization is blah, blah, blah. Have you seen, tell me about a time when you've seen John demonstrate these core values? That's the kind of questions they ask in a rep. So
Yep.
some companies do, I mean, a lot of companies, quote unquote, get references, but they don't really know the candidate from the perspective of some other people. And it's a game changer to me in the whole selection process. And it's an investment, but I'm surprised more people don't invest more heavily, particularly as more and more and more liability issues come up.
Yep. Wow. Wow. What have you seen, learned, implemented, led over the years that made sure that, I mean, I hear this a lot, especially doing interviews and then when I'm out speaking and talking with different folks, but oh, my company doesn't listen to me. Doesn't matter what I say because it will never make any difference because it can't get up to the higher ups. What did you do, lead and implement in a way that, where people did feel heard at kind of all different levels?
Well, I'm going to tell you what I think, and then I'll tell you a story.
Okay.
So I'm a little bit of an eternal optimist around those things. It's like I think if you're persistent enough, you just start with one person. You
Mm,
influence one person.
yep.
If you lead a small team in the organization, and I give this example sometimes, your organization won't buy into my definition of culture about having a meaningful purpose and challenging mission and demonstrating core values. Okay, well, you lead a small team. Why doesn't your team have a purpose, mission, and values? And then after you influence that, your buddy that's a leader in another department, you say, "Oh, this is what we did, and this has really improved the culture of our team. You might try this," and all of a sudden they have a purpose, mission, and values, and that becomes a groundswell within the organization just because you influenced one
Yep.
person.
Yep.
So if I'm really a leader, that's what I do, right? Influence other people. And I
Yep.
may not be able to influence the president of the company, but I can influence the people that I see every day. And that's what I'm going to try to do. So I want to tell you a story about a young woman that changed something within an organization. This young woman was having a baby, and on site childcare was not a very popular thing at the time. But there were some laws that had gone into effect in the uh, early to mid 90s that made it very favorable for organizations with tax credits to actually benefit tremendously, both federal and some state levels, if they had on site childcare. And so this young woman in a, you know, not an hourly position, but not a managerial position, just an individual contributor. I shouldn't say just, but an individual contributor in the organization started doing her research. And one day she made an appointment. She went to see the president of the company. And she told the president of the company her personal story about how difficult childcare was in the area of the company and how much it was needed and told a little bit about this financial model and how that might could work. She
Mm.
happened to be an accountant. And the company, it took them a long time. But in 2001, they opened their first on site childcare center. And now I believe they're the highest per capita child care center in the country, meaning that for the number of employees they have, they serve the largest number of
Wow.
children. And that's a Chick-fil-A. 3 buildings later, hundreds of children being served every day, hundreds of employees benefiting from this great service of having on-site childcare. And it started with a courageous
Mm.
young woman who was willing to step up and do her homework and say, this is a real need. And somebody probably doesn't get very much credit for that. But that's how that, and if I have any Chick-fil-A people listening to this, they may not even know the background of that. But that's
Wow.
how that all started. And she got the attention of somebody who listened to her because she had a good story and she told it. So don't ever underestimate, regardless of what your role or your age is, of how influential you can be if you have some courage and you tell a good story.
Wow. That is so good. Unbelievable. Uh, Shifting topics for a second. A lot of the kind of middle level leaders that I've coached, or some of the organizations I've worked with, I've seen, or as again, as I'm around kind of those middle managers, one of the struggles that I see often, you can correct me if I'm wrong or tell me what you think about this, but especially that person who gets promoted for the first time, and now for the first time they're overseeing other people. It seems like there's sometimes with some of them an ongoing struggle to kind of let go and let the team now lead. But there's this struggle of like still trying to hold on and still trying, that all they've ever known is that day-to-day job, instead of releasing those leaders to let them soar and succeed. Would you agree with that? Have you seen that? What are ways that that kind of middle manager leader can make sure that they're, stepping back and, letting their team, empowering their team to win and to lead?
Yeah, so sometimes that really happens when you promote those individual contributors that have done the jobs of a particular function, and then you promote them into leadership, but they are experts on everything that they're leading. So
Mm,
it makes it that much
right.
harder for them to let go because they know what needs to happen. I was in that situation. That's what happened to me in talent. I had done every job in that function, and it was a myriad of different responsibilities. And so when I had the chance to go to sustainability, I went to a role that I knew very little about. My husband will tell you I wasn't even a very good recycler at home. Now, since then, anybody listening to this, I want you to know I have a full, big old can upstairs waiting for Friday to recycle.
Yes.
But at the time, that wasn't my major focus. And I didn't have. I mean, if I had stayed until traditional retirement age, I still wouldn't have had time to become an expert. But I had experts all around me,
Yep.
and that's when I realized what real leadership is. Real leadership, you can actually lead something you know nothing about if you select great people and you trust them and you let them do their job and you lead. You remove the barriers and obstacles so they can do what
Wow. Wow.
they're gifted to do.
Yep.
And I look back on that and I think that was my greatest leadership development assignment ever. And so I encourage a lot of others to do that too. I encourage other leaders, like, if you want to develop your leaders, then put them in a position where they actually have to lead. And to do that, it might be good if they don't know anything about the subject matter, and
Wow.
which is a little risky, but
Yeah.
um, it all worked. And
I
so
love that.
I think that anytime you promote somebody from within their function to that situation, that's something they're going to have a hard time with. Now, what did I tell myself when I was actually in that leadership position and talent? And I had, sometimes I didn't do it very well at all, to be honest with you, Jason. I can think back to some feedback I received from some of my team members that said, ideation is my number one strength if you
Mm,
follow strength finders. So if you were having a meeting with me and you came in with an idea, you know what might happen? I heard your idea. I actually thought it was a great idea. But instead of saying, that is a great idea, let's follow through with that, I would say, hey, I have an idea, because I would build on that. That was the ideation to me. And what they were feeling like is I didn't have a very good idea. So you have to learn, as I learned in that situation, it's like let them bring your ideas. If it's not putting everything at risk, even if it's not even your best idea, if you don't think, well, that's not the best idea or that's
yep.
not the best solution, if it's a doable solution, it's worth what your talent's going to learn from executing. And if it doesn't work, think about how much they learned from that situation. So I think that's really, really important that
Mm,
leaders step back and go, it, they need to fail sometimes, as long as it's not putting everything at risk. They need that to learn. And then when they make a mistake, all you're looking for is them not to make the same mistake twice. So if it's a mistake, you know, treat them like you would your own son or daughter, or you'd want your own son or daughter to be treated, or do you want your husband or wife to be treated in the workplace, and say, hey, we made a mistake. Let's not make that same mistake again. And by the way, let's talk about what we learned from that, so that and make sure others learn
wow.
from what we do. And
Yep.
that's true of successes as well.
Sure. So good. I could ask you a million more questions. I'll ask you one more, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. But when Chick-fil-A is notoriously known for being stringent. Not I don't know if stringent's the right word, but very selective when they pick their operators. What were the key couple qualities that internally, when I mean the onslaught of people were applying and are still applying to be their own owner operator? What are the kind of those key qualities that you guys identified to look for?
Yeah. I can't answer for what they're looking for
Sure,
today.
sure.
But again, assuming that some things carry through, because it is a company of long tradition and history. But what I looked for when I was making this selection is, number one of Chick-fil-A's core values is we're here to serve. Everybody in that organization serves somebody. Some people are serving the actual customer with a $20 bill in their hand. Some people are serving those who serve them. We had a saying, it's developed by our former president, Jimmy Collins: if you're not selling chicken, you better be serving someone who is.
Wow.
So the first thing that I was always looking for is that spirit of service, not somebody that had an attitude of, I'm going to come in and quote unquote buy a franchise, hire a general manager, and hey, I'm going to be playing golf or going fishing or having tea with the girls or whatever it is that
Yep.
they wanted to do. And that is, that's not that was not what we looked for. We looked for people who wanted to be hands-on and were willing to serve others. And then the other thing I'm looking for is leadership. And again, you don't have to know how to cook a chicken sandwich to be a great leader.
Sure.
Leadership is finding and keeping great talent, growing that talent to execute the goals of your organization. That's leadership. And it really, you can apply that to any kind of organization there is, whether you're managing, rocket scientists, or you're managing those people who serve in a restaurant. So that is the other piece of leadership. And then the third thing for me, and I think this was very personal to me, is that I wanted people who had a track record of making good decisions. They
Oh,
had good judgment. And I don't mean that they didn't make mistakes. I was very interested in the mistakes they made and how they recovered from them. As I said before, I was interested they made the same mistakes twice. But what their track record of decision making is. And this becomes important because the last question I always ask myself in an interview is, would I want my children to work for this person? Because
oh,
if I wouldn't want my children to work for this person, why would anyone else? So that became very personal. I mean, I had the picture of my three sons in my office, several pictures actually. And
yep.
sometimes I'd point to that picture and I'd look at that candidate and I'd say, why would I want those boys right there to work for you? And I got a lot of great answers over the years.
Wow. With your new company and your new role, what's been the biggest surprise about it for you? What's been something that you maybe didn't anticipate, but now that you've figured that out, it's been kind of an eye-opening experience for you.
Yeah, there's probably been a bunch of things. It's funny. People still say your new company and your new role, because it's going on, like I
Yeah,
said, 6 years here,
6 years.
but it's so new compared to working 33 years somewhere else. But, the truth is, I learned something every single day by
Wow.
running
Yeah.
my own organization. That when I went into it, there were a lot of things that I knew weren't my gifts. I mean, people say, what do you miss most about Chick-fil-A? And I say, well, the IT department is high on the list, and my assistant is high on the list. And that's the truth, because, those people are really, really valuable to you. And I had to learn a lot of, I mean, the fact that I even did my own podcast and the technology behind that and all that I learned about, I mean, I didn't come of the age of social media and what I had to learn about social media to promote my business. My husband, we started early on. He was the bookkeeper in our family. He handled the money and finances, and so all of a sudden, I had a company, and I had to become the bookkeeper. And that's but because I'm a learner, that's another one of my strengths is I'm a learner, and so I enjoyed that whole process. It was new, it was fun, and that's really been great. The other thing is I learned a lot about myself. I'm not very good at saying no.
Mm.
And I 2 years ago, I was literally speaking 50 times a year
Oh, wow.
and doing consulting and doing coaching. And I stepped back and I said, well, you worked like this at Chick-fil-A and you're supposed to sort of be retired, but you're working the same way you worked before. And is that really, that's good. That was a great start. It launched my company, got 2 more books published, all that. But is that really how you want to spend the season of your life? I had a long talk with myself. So I backed up and I said, what I really want to do is I want 1 or 2 clients a month that I go deep with. I want to
Mm.
be fully present for every single client. I want everything to be customized to that client. I want to leave an impact on those clients. And so I backed up and now I will only say yes once or twice a month. And once that month is full and scheduled, I have to say, I'm so sorry, but I feel like you get the best of me when I give you my, the full attention that you deserve and that you paid for.
Wow.
And that was one of the, and it didn't change the financial situation at all. I mean, I've had the best years I've had since I made that decision. I've been
Wow.
happier, and I
Yep.
hope that my clients have been really fulfilled too.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, before I let you go, I ask all of our guests because we're building this giant kind of online communication and leadership skills library, and so we're putting all the best resources. But would love to know do you have a favorite speaker, someone that every time you listen to them, oh my goodness, you walk away and you think I've got to send that talk or that presentation to somebody else because it was just that powerful.
Yeah, I have a couple, and there's some of my favorites. I mean, I love to listen to Pat Lencioni.
Mm.
I love his books and I love to listen to him. He's a very wise man, especially as he talks about leading teams. So,
Yep.
and I love to listen to Marcus Buckingham. It might be his accent. Um, I've known Marcus a while, so he would laugh at me. But yeah, I really enjoy listening to him.
I love it.
He's just a great speaker to listen to.
Oh, absolutely. If you're a podcast person, is there a guilty pleasure or a leadership development podcast that you just keep going back to, you forward it on to people because it's just provides such quality content?
You mean besides speak with people?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, some of my favorites are podcasts that I've actually been on.
Yeah.
Beyond the To-Do List with Eric Fisher is one of those. It's
Mm.
just a lot of, it brings a lot of authors and business leaders and people with different insights about things onto that podcast. And I've really enjoyed that over time. I like She Impacts Culture by Dr. Jen Bennett. And one reason I like Jen's podcast is because I like following Jen. She is a young, well, I say she's a young woman because she's younger than me. I don't mean like she's 20 something, but she's obviously a doctor and a professor. So, but I love that she's always learning and transforming,
Mm.
and watching her do that, whatever life throws her way, she's just constantly looking for what's next. And I really enjoy listening to her. And then Carrie Newhoff, and he Carrie's a little bit more on the faith based, but I've been on Carrie's podcast a couple times. He has amazing guests on there.
Yep.
His insights, and part of it's who he is. Former lawyer, became a pastor, and now he's full-time consultant. But I love his podcast.
I love that. I love that. Is there a book? Is there a book that you just say, boy, every leader has got to read this book? I know it's hard to pick just one, but
I have a bunch, but I will pick just one. It's if you can only read one book, it's Atomic Habits by James
Oh,
Clear.
yep.
It was published in 2018, but if somebody tells me I have to give one, now I have three, but if you tell me one, that's the one especially people starting out, is the book I wish I'd had
Yes.
when I was 21 years old.
Well, I'll take the other two because I would love to know.
Well, the other one is Integrity by Dr. Henry Cloud.
Oh, yeah.
And I think every leader should read that book. He has so many that are great, but that one
Yes.
definitely comes out as one that I think about.
I love it.
And then the other one that is universal is Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yep.
And my favorite is habit number 5, by the way: seek first to understand, then be understood. It changed my leadership.
Wow. So powerful. This has been so rich. I've taken a flurry of notes. I so appreciate you just opening up the vault of wisdom that you have so amazingly and serving our listeners. Where's the best place we can send them to find out more about you, more about your books, your speaking, all of that kind of stuff?
Okay. They'll go to deeannturner.com, DEEANN Turner.com. And by the way, if you go to that website, there is a free resource. You can download my top 25 interviewing questions. And these questions are good for practicing for an interview. If you're going to be interviewed, it's also great for leaders, especially people. These are a little bit more tailored to entry level, but you could change it up. The best thing is it doesn't just give you the question. It gives you an idea of what you're looking for and why in the answer. So you can get that there. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. Also, I'm at Facebook, Dee Ann Turner Author, and on Instagram at Dee Ann Turner. If you read my books, I'd love an Amazon review. Thank you so much. That's such a big help to authors when you do that.
My goodness. We will post all of this in the Speak with People community group. We'll post definitely the link to the interview questions. Wow. And of course, on all of our social media. Dee Ann, this was such an honor. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me and have this conversation. We want to provide conversations that kind of provide a spark for some type of challenge or change or transformation. And this one hits that right on the nail. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's been a delight, Jason.
Well, thank you for joining us on another episode of the Speak with People podcast. We hope that you were encouraged. We hope that you were inspired and challenged to improve your communication skills. I want to thank you again for being a part of the Speak with People podcast community. Make sure you don't miss out on being a part of the Speak with People Facebook community group. Just head to Facebook, type in Speak with People, scroll down and join our community, because every single day we're encouraging each other. We're helping each other to improve our communication skills. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next episode.